Community Forum is sponsored by the Easton Grange 196 and a friend of Yardley Wood Rink and the Easton Lions Club.
There's a storm across the valley, the clouds are rolling in. The afternoon is heavy on your shoulders. There's a truck out on the 4-lane, a mile or more away. The whining of his wheels just makes it colder.
Welcome to Community Forum. Today is February 1st, 2024. My name is Priscilla Almquist Olsen, your host, and today I welcome one of Easton's treasures, our town historian, one of two, Ed Hands. Welcome, Ed.
Hi, how you doing?
I am doing just fine, and I know that I have invited Ed to talk about one of the most famous people in Easton's history, architect Henry Hobson Richardson. And in Easton, we have 5 structures that he built, more than any other place in the whole wide world, and people come from all over the world to view our structures. So it's Ames Free Library, Oaks Ames Memorial Hall, the cottage on Elm Street, the Langwater Estate,
Gate Lodge. The
Gate Lodge.
And the railroad station.
And we can't forget the Historical Society's railroad station depot. And of course, Henry Hobson Richardson is known by most Americans as the architect of the Trinity Church in Boston.
Yes.
A magnificent structure also. So Ed, welcome. And I'm really interested in knowing about Henry Hobson Richardson's early life, where he came from, some of the little characteristics that are unknown by most of the people watching this show.
Well, he was the great-grandson of Joseph Priestley, a British scientist who is credited with discovering oxygen. And Mr. Priestley made enough money that he was threatened by one of his sons, who had to flee the country, and he came to the United States. And that's how the Richardson family, a couple of generations down, found themselves in New Orleans. Henry and his family lived in downtown New Orleans, but the rest of the family did have a plantation. And in the summer, to escape the disease-ridden city, Henry would spend time on the plantation.
Oh boy, and of course this is after the Civil War.
No, this is not.
No?
This is what's surprising. He was born in the late 1830s. He was a little bit older than the future governor, Oliver Ames. And he lived until 1886 and died at an early age in his 40s. So he actually came to Massachusetts on the eve of the Civil War. Can you imagine somebody from Louisiana coming to Boston to go to school? And you would think that there would be strong clashes, but Henry did very well socially at Harvard, not so much academically.
Yeah, you were saying before he was 89th out of 91 class members?
Yes, absolutely. He didn't spend a lot of time in class. He got involved in a lot of the clubs at Harvard because he was very much a bon vivant. Played the flute, was in the Hasty Puddings Club. They had a fraternity that were all musicians. He was in that, and the highest club at Harvard then and now was the Porcellian Club, and he became a member there. Now, part of the reason was he was incredibly wealthy and would buy a round or two for all of his friends.
Mm-hmm. And you said that his family in the Southern tradition wanted him to go to West Point. And why was it that he was disqualified?
He was disqualified because from birth, all his life, he had a terrible lisp. And it was something that his friends found endearing, but disqualified him from military command, which involved shouting orders in those days, which he wasn't able to do very effectively. So he ended up at his second choice school, which was Harvard.
Okay, and we are the beneficiaries of that, aren't we?
Yes, I mean, we have, when you say we have 5 Richardson buildings in town, that's 10% of the extant Richardson buildings. Volume-wise, it doesn't match up with the Buffalo Asylum, which is still one of the largest buildings in America, but that was only one building.
That he was the architect for?
Yes. Yes, that was his first major collaboration with Frederick Law Olmsted, who's another part of our story here in Easton.
Yes, and obviously the Oak Sands Memorial Hall and landscape architect. Okay.
Yeah, for the Rockery.
Yeah, the Rockery.
He also was. He also did work at Hobart Ames's estate behind Queesit, and he Olmsted most importantly, I think, did the landscaping around the sheep pasture.
Didn't he also do the Governor Ames estate?
He did not do the Governor Ames estate. That's a common misconception. Governor Ames knew Olmsted and actually visited New York when Olmsted was working on Central Park to get ideas. But the Governor Ames estate, to the best of our knowledge, was a homebrew that the governor did it himself. His cousin Frederick over at Langwater did call in Olmsted, and probably the most pristine Olmsted landscaping is standing at the Governor Ames estate at the end of the property at the bridge and looking over the pond at Richardson's Gate Lodge. That's all a Olmsted.
I see.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
Okay. Oh, that's really beautiful. Yeah. So tell me, if he didn't do well in school, how did he do graduate work in architecture?
Yeah, that's a very good question. He did well in the math courses, which is what kept him from being 91st. And at this time, there was a lot of engineering involved in being an architect. So he developed an interest. Part of that was because some of the architecture in Boston, even though it wasn't absolutely avant-garde, was something called the Boston granite style.
Oh.
And so some of the stone buildings, like there was a reservoir building, and probably the best still standing example is the Boston Athenaeum, were designed in rough cut stone with roundish arches. And so it was something that stuck in his mind. And he decided to, at the end of his Harvard studies, to get engaged and tell his fiancée, I'm going to go to France for a year to go to Les Écoles des Beaux-Arts, which was interesting because after Richardson, it became almost de rigueur for architectural students to go there until MIT really developed their architecture program. So people like John Ames Mitchell eventually went over there, but Richardson was only the second American to go. Richard Morris, the guy that designed the breakers in Biltmore, was the first American. So the good news for Richardson was he was born in Louisiana, so that meant he could speak French fluently. But the 4 years at Harvard were mainly wasted, so when he took the entrance exam at Les Écoles, he flunked. But he wasn't willing to give up, so he decided to hang around in France, and then 6 to 9 months later take the entrance exams again. Two things happened. Number one, he got a job as a draftsman in the atelier of Theodore Labrouste, who was a really top-notch architect. And if you take a look at his St. Genevieve library, it has many design elements we'd be familiar with as part of Richardson style. This Romanesque style that we all credit Richardson had started in the 1830s in Germany. So I'll tell you a little bit later why Richardson gets to call it Richardson Romanesque and everybody else just has Romanesque. But so he got a job, kept from starving. He had to sell some of his books. He had to sell some of his clothes.
Well, his parents didn't support him.
Well, what happened? Guess what?
What?
The Anaconda Plan. The Civil War came along and the South was blockaded.
Oh,
there
yeah.
was no money. So Richardson suffered for a while, and then he decided to come back to Boston and get the advice of his friends. His friends said, well, you know, if you stay here, you're from the South, you have to take a loyalty oath to the Union. He refused to do that, and they said, well, you probably need to go back to France. So he went back to France. Richardson's relationship to his Southern heritage is really interesting. He wouldn't take a loyalty oath to the Union, but he never, ever, ever, ever went back to the South after the Civil War was over. When his mother died, he never went to the funeral.
Okay.
So there was some ambiguity about the whole issue of, I think, slavery. Mm-hmm. And he had been influenced by his friends up here in the North and was much more comfortable with them than with the Southern tradition.
Yeah. Oh, and I think that's so interesting because, well, he was young. It was his youth. He was in his formative years. His brain hadn't really been formed until he was 25, we've learned later, right? So he was open to new ideas and so forth. And I think he was very cosmopolitan. And
cosmopolitan's a good way to look at that. Yeah.
And also, he went to France. And you know, the French were
much more open.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Even in those days, you're absolutely right.
It's so nice that you complete my sentences, Ed. What does that mean?
I'm scared to figure out. But when he was at the Les Écoles, the way that you here in the United States should think about Les Écoles des Beaux-Arts is sort of like a super duper technical school. It seems a lot like the regional school that we have here in Easton.
Oh.
Because they had a school, and they had classes on things like the history of architecture and math and all of this sort of stuff. But most of the students spent their time with a specific architect or whatever they were studying.
So it was an apprenticeship type of
It really
education.
was, yeah. And what would happen is on a monthly basis, there would be almost like contests. And they were given a written description of what they needed to design. They had 24 hours to make a rough sketch. And then if the sketch was approved, then they would go on to develop a full plan and maybe even a model. That was the architectural education. And
wow.
That's how Richardson learned the business. It didn't hurt that he was stuck in France for 4 times longer than he anticipated being there. He was there from 1860 to 1865, and he was only planning to be there for 2 years. So he was able to travel to other parts of Europe and see a lot of buildings.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you, what influences did he have from France and also from his travels?
Well, he had a lot of influences, and one of the things that he did was take advantage of another technological innovation of that time, which was photography. So he developed a very large library of pictures of buildings, and that paid off way down the line here in Easton, because our little railroad station, if you look at it carefully, is influenced by picture books that he got from Japan.
With the dragons.
Well, the dragons and the shape of the roof, the sheltering shape of the roof, are all very typical of Japanese buildings. So he was definitely into accepting influence from all over the place. And that's one of his important traits. That's what set him apart. You or I could be an architect if we studied hard, because there's a lot of, okay, let's make this building symmetrical. So we only have to really design half the building because the other half is just the flip side. And if we're really terrible, all we have to do is find something like the breakers, and then just keep designing the breakers. Take a picture of it, do the sketches, and turn it into another thing. Richardson didn't do that. Richardson was an original, and that's what makes him so special.
Yeah. And so you talked about his fiancée, right?
Yes.
And when did they get married? Did she go to France with him?
No, this was a long engagement. They didn't get married until he got back in 1865 or maybe even 1866. And at that point, rather than come directly back to Boston, he married her, and then they moved to New York City. And the reason they moved to New York City was there was a lot of business in this, growing metropolis. And if you wanted to have a nice little suburb, you could live in a place like Staten Island. And so Richardson built a house there. And lo and behold, it was in the same little neighborhood as Frederick Law Olmsted. And that's how they met.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So he was married in 1865.
Yeah.
And I was married in 1965.
Yes.
100 years later. And where did I live? Staten Island. Isn't
Wow.
that unusual?
Yeah. Did you meet any famous architects?
No.
Okay. They'd all moved by then.
Yeah.
So what happened was that Richardson stayed there, and despite the fact that, unbeknownst to him, or doctors of the time, he had a debilitating disease that eventually was going to kill him. But all through his life, it would force him to get incredibly tired and have to spend weeks and weeks on end in bed.
Oh dear.
This didn't slow him down because I guess there are other things you can do in bed, and the number of children multiplied rather quickly. But ultimately what happened is that some of his Harvard friends let him in on the idea that there was going to be a design competition for a church in Copley Square in Boston, which became Trinity Church. Richardson had designed a few buildings before in Massachusetts, again, mainly because he had connections. And those early buildings were pretty much standard Gothic churches. If you look carefully at our little Unity Church, which was done by John Ames Mitchell, there are a lot of details that look like some of Richardson's design work. And Richardson actually submitted a competition piece for Unity Church that got turned down. The Ames is, let's see, we could pay Richardson, or we could have cousin John Ames Mitchell design the building. John Ames Mitchell was a very competent architect. Don't get me wrong, but ultimately Richardson got the job of designing a church on Brattle Street, the Brattle Street Church, and it had this huge tower. And at the top of the tower there was a frieze that on each corner had angels blowing trumpets. There was a guy in the United States at this time from France. Richardson may have known him from his time over there, and he hired him to do the sculpture work. And this was a man named Bartholdi, who was in the country trying to raise money for this really big statue he wanted to do, which was the Statue of Liberty, and ultimately he got to do that. But he also got to design this frieze with the angels and their trumpets on the corners, and almost immediately the church was nicknamed the Church of the Holy Bean Blowers because it looked like kids with pea shooters on the corners. And so that helped Richardson's reputation, and then he got the Trinity Church thing. The Brattle Street Church and the Trinity Church were in this new Richardsonian use of the Romanesque idiom, and that made his reputation. Here's an American architect that's doing something different from just copying stuff from England. He was doing original things. Part of the reason for that is that Trinity Church is on an odd-shaped lot, and he had to work around that. And it also had the tremendous ability of sinking into the back bay. So there was an engineering problem to be solved with these wooden telephone poles they had to keep driving into the ground to put the foundation on. If Boston ever dries out, all those wonderful buildings will just sink in because these posts that are holding them up will rot away. They're able to stay because underneath the back bay, there's still the bay, and that keeps these trees wet, and they don't rot when they're wet.
Really?
Yes.
My
So it's
God,
really kind of an interesting thing. So
you're a wealth of information.
So by 1877, Copley square is graced by Trinity Church, and Richardson's reputation is made. And that attracts the attention of Frederick Lothrop Ames, who basically at this time owns most of the Back Bay.
Really?
Yeah, this is how he became the richest man in New England. It's the railroads, yeah, that's important. But he owned the Back Bay. So he was selling off house lots.
And so the Ames building in Boston is one of the buildings that he
Richardson, I think, did 2 office buildings for the Ameses.
What about the current one that we all know that's called the Ames building?
That's one of his. Yes.
Is it really? Okay.
And that's where Richardson gets credit for being the grandfather of the skyscraper, because it was a tall building for its time. And the other thing is, interestingly enough, there was this little boy or young man in Boston in the 1870s who walked by the Brattle Street Church and said, "Oh my God, this is really beautiful. Who did this?" And he began to study this architect. And it turned out that the little boy was Louis Sullivan, who is going to become the real father of the skyscraper, and who had his student continue the tradition. His student happened to be Frank Lloyd Wright. So it's Richardson, Sullivan, and Frank Lloyd Wright. They're sort of the holy trinity of American architectural history.
And it all happened in Boston.
It all happened in Boston. It all happened because of Richardson and this exciting stuff. You bring in Bartoli, who's a sculptor, and if you want to see, this is one of my favorite things. The window of need in Unity Church, the angel of help in the middle there is Mrs. Bartoli.
No.
Yes. And the body of Mrs. Bartoli is the body of the Statue of Liberty.
Really?
Yes. However, if you take a look at the angel, she's very beautiful and very mild-mannered. And Bartoli said, not quite what we need for Lady Liberty. And also, this will help, keep peace in the house. Mom, would you like to pose for the head of the Statue of Liberty? So it's his wife's body and his mother's head. That's our Statue of Liberty. So we can see that in our little window over here. Anyway, Richardson was really good. He wasn't so driven by ego. In fact, he wasn't driven by ego at all. Man, he would love to collaborate with people, and he would bring in these wonderful people. And I think that's why he worked so well with Olmsted.
Yeah, well, don't you think his joviality that he nurtured at Harvard helped him also? He was a social butterfly.
He was a social butterfly. He was well known by people in Boston, and many of them gave him commissions.
Yeah. And so tell me, what disease did he have?
Because he had something called Bright's disease, which is a kidney disease. And it caused his kidneys not to function very well, which led to fatigue and also retention of water. So as you follow Richardson in pictures, he gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
Was that just water, or was that?
A lot of it was water.
A lot of it's water.
Now, his doctor said, if you eat a moderate diet and give up drinking, just as my doctors keep telling me, you'll be fine. But he never would do that. He would love a pitcher of milk in the morning and wine at lunch and all of this sort of stuff. So he never got over the bon vivant lifestyle, and that didn't help his overall.
No, and there's a wonderful photo of him at the Oaks Memorial Hall as one enters. See it right there on the wall, and he is tall, thin, and elegant.
Yes.
And then if you see the photo of him near the end of his life, and he was in his 40s, right, when he passed, he is enormous.
350 pounds when he died.
How much?
350.
350.
And there's a painting from the last year of his life.
But he was tall too, wasn't he?
He was relatively tall for his time, but still 350 is 350.
Yeah, really. Woo!
And the other thing is the lifestyle and the doctor's bills left him, despite the fact he was the most successful architect in America, broke.
What?
Yes. So he didn't have any money.
Was he taken advantage of by the medical profession?
No, he was taken advantage of by his lust for life and desire for good food and parties with his friends and all of this sort of stuff. So he was a spender. And he had a large family. By the time he died, one of his daughters had married one of his draftsmen. And looking at the family finances, Richardson's draftsmen decided to stay together and finish off the work that was still available to the family to help pay off the debts. So they did that, and then they found that they enjoyed working together so much, they stayed together, and the firm continues on to this day.
Okay, when you say stayed together, was that the husband and wife, or was that the...
That was the husband and wife and the other draftsman in Richardson's office. So it became Shepley and Rutan, who were his two main draftsmen. And then it became, as they took over some of the older firms, Shepley, Rutan, and Coolidge, Shepley, Rutan, Bullfinch, and Coolidge, blah, 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 blah. Now
Bullfinch, he's the guy that did the State House.
Yeah, so now the name of the firm is Shepley Bullfinch, SB. Richardson's name's not even mentioned, but it's Richardson's original firm. Still.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Wow.
And if you want to find a modern example of their work here in Easton, the Stonehill Library, their new library, is one of them. It's a Richardson thing. And they also did the 1930 addition to the library and the 1904 Old Bank Post Office building, which is my favorite building.
Yes. So, because I always thought that was a Richardson building.
Yeah, most people do, and it's a wonderful homage, because by the time they came in 1904, obviously Richardson's Memorial Hall was generally considered to be one of the finest buildings in America. It made the top 10 of one of the very first lists of famous American buildings.
You're talking about the Oak Ames Memorial Hall.
Oak Ames Memorial Hall, yep.
And I think the stained glass windows on the second floor of the stage, I mean, it's just an elegant, and as I understand it, when the children of Oak Ames dedicated that building to their father, in memory of their father, they talked about it as a community events venue, didn't they? You know, they wanted it.
No, that's...
Oh, they really wanted it to be a town hall.
Yeah, don't believe the family propaganda. No. Fred will tell you, oh no, they never wanted to be a town hall, but the documentation says, yeah, town hall. And the good citizens of Easton, who at this time said, yeah, you know that rockery thing over there that you want for Civil War Memorial? We don't like that very much. So we're going to have a memorial at the other side of town in front of the town hall. We don't need a town hall either. So they ended up with a building that wasn't going to meet its original use. And it was set up to be a fabulous performance center. That second floor in 1883 was probably state of the art. And you know, we can point out things like the sloping stage and all of this sort of stuff. And the painting at the back of the hall, which please get it restored as part of fixing up the building, was in the original Booth Theater.
In New York City.
In New York City. And many famous actors and actresses like Sarah Bernhardt and Drew Barrymore's great-grandfather all performed under that wonderful picture. So
it was amazing. A performance venue. And
yes.
And that's what Freddie Ames has been doing and creating. And there are performances for the next few months. And then, of course, the Shoveltown Cultural District sponsors 6 or 7 concerts in the July and August there on the steps outside. Okay, well, I guess we have to wrap this up. Ed Hands, you are Easton's treasure. I thank you so much, and you're coming back. We're going to do several more shows.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, thank you again, and thank you for viewing. Hope you've enjoyed all of these wonderful tidbits of information about Henry Hobson Richardson that none of us ever knew. But now we do. Thank you for joining. Priscilla Almquist Olsen. Be well.
Community Forum is sponsored by the Easton Grange 196 and a friend of Yardley Wood Rink and the Easton Lions Club.